session 2. And we'll build on what we just heard with an interesting mix of factors or dimensions that we'll bring into the discussion, because we're mixing something that's quite tangible and clear and fixed, which is the regulatory aspects of what we're talking about, and we're adding to that something that is relatively new as a consideration, and that's the behavioral layer, the layer of more intangible factors, which ultimately play a role in this context. The mix of presenters who will attempt to outline a discussion around this includes Mia Edeltoft. She's a legal expert focused on climate risk, nature risk, and insurance. And then we also have Polina Tikova, who will be the voice of the insurance sector. She represents the insurance company DZI. And then I am Milena Nikolova. I'm a behavioral scientist turned entrepreneur, working with Behavior Smart, which is a boutique advisory focused on bringing knowledge about human behavior and human psychology into the area of sustainability and climate change. So the way that we wanted to construct this, because of the nature of the topic and the different dimensions that it brings together, is to do it a little bit like a dialogue. Because most of the project we actually ended up working next to each other and really looking at these two aspects of data sharing and adaptation as a whole. So what I'm going to do to get us started is ask my first question to Bia, which is, what are the main regulatory and policy barriers for data sharing, since we talk about the fact that it's really, really important that it's underlying many of the adaptation processes that we want to see?
Okay, I'll try to answer that. But before I answer that, I want to, let's see, this one, I guess. Yeah. What we did in Soteria was we had 8 regions around Europe, and 3 of them were the beneficiary regions. So we concentrated on 3 of the regions, and we sent a lot of questions to them. What kind of data do you have? How do you implement the EU regulations? How do you use your data? What you need, and how do you use the data? That was sort of the main questions. But also, do you have you implemented the plans and actions, etc.? So based on that, we got some answers. So this is part of the general answers we get from these regions, and they are asking their municipalities, because from what I learned with my experience is 30 years within the insurance industry. So I just this is my first sort of project as a researcher, but my basis is really like working with the insurance industry and working towards the national authorities, working towards the municipalities to try to understand what do they need to come further, what kind of data they need to implement adaptation measures, because we saw that nothing happened. The only time things were happening was after a disaster. And we said, how can you learn from the disaster? It is so that they didn't have any impact data. So they knew there was a disaster, and like was mentioned, with the high insurance penetration, the insurance were paying, but they kept their information, their impact and the cost and the data they have from insurance, they kept it on their own insurance basis, each company. Okay, so what they told us that many of them didn't even have, the municipal had a strategy, and those who had a strategy didn't have concrete plans, or they had concrete plans, but they didn't have allocated resources or experts to fill these plans. Very general the feedback. And then again, they said we lack data which is relevant to make risk assessment, for example. And where they had accessible data, they were fragmented. So they were in a national authority, there were some in insurance, and there was some in civil protection, and so they wanted to because we were trying to see how can we consolidate these data in a way that it makes it a bit easier for them. And then they because if you have granular data, and this is what Louis also talked about, they have a possibility to understand the awareness of where are the exposed areas. And what is actually the cost of climate change or disaster risk reduction? And also, how can we use this data for risk assessment? Because that's how I will talk about a little bit about the Norwegian case, which I was leading for 10 years with it from the insurance industry, making several projects together with national authorities and also with municipalities on how we can use insurance loss data. And this work is really what Sintef and Louis is basing their presentation also on, because we managed to share this data on an asset level, and I'll come back to that. So it was very clear also from the municipalities that if we're going to do these risk assessments or risk and vulnerability analysis, we need street or asset level data. And why? It's because if you're in a big city, you're in Paris or in Oslo, you need to know much more on a very granular local area where to start and how to prioritize your maintenance and how to change parts of the city to use nature-based solution, for example. So they didn't have very few, I think, but they had access to granular insurance data. So that was from what we found out in Soteria. And then the thing with Sam Milori, I think they asked me, so what is the problem with the regulatory and the factor? And I don't really see a problem. I guess it's a little bit strange, but a regulatory regime can be changed, okay? But you have to be very certain about what is the problem and why do we need to change it. And I have been working with something called the GDPR, with the EU Personal Directive, to say, this is my data, you cannot share your data without a consent from the owner of the data. And also you have the regulation on insurance, which says, oh, I'm running an insurance company, I need to do my job as a compensation, and then I need to ask for this data from my customer, which is the policyholder. But it's the policyholder who owns this data. But they have the right to ask for them, and they collect them individually. And they can collect them in different names, or like was mentioned by Louis. But so when I worked 20 years for the Association of Insurance and Banks, we saw that we needed to collect this data from all the members, all the insurance companies, and find a way to standardize how we collect this data, what is it called, etc. Keep in mind, insurers are not allowed to ask for more than what they need to do the pricing of the insurance products, so they cannot ask for more. Absolutely, they don't have the certification to say that for that, because everybody, why don't they collect some other data? So that's very strict rules around it. So and the question I very often got is like, why should they? Or I got from my board, actually my insurance board, with the CEOs of the 10 biggest insurance company. Why should we share this data? The municipalities, they must have some data themselves. And I could put on the table that they actually didn't have any impacts data down on that level. So the question also was like, why don't they share the data? Because I've been talking about this in Insurance Europe, where I've been part of committees under the Insurance Europe. And other countries that can't do that. Well, I cooperate with Denmark. They started to share the data. So, and we're talking about insurance loss data, on damage data on asset level. So it took a while, but I think this is what we're working with Soteria, because we're also looking at what happened in Norway. How can we replicate this into other communities or countries? Yeah, okay. And then the the EIOPA, which is the regulatory real regime in Europe for insurance companies. They are also, we had a lot of contact with them, so they see this as a possibility to also use these insurance data in a more effective way as to building resilience. So they are now looking into right now, how can we do something similar like what they did in Norway, but at least collect the data and show so that the citizens has a better understanding of what is at risk. So the awareness part of it. Yeah, and then of course, what we always have to consider is like, what data? Who needs what data? When I talked to the engineers in the city, they said, we only need data from sewage backup. That's our role and responsibility. We don't need any more. And then you talk to the land use planner in the municipality, that we need stormwater, we need the different type of data. So you really have to go down and ask each individual that you are sharing the data with, what do you need? And that was part of what we also did in this Norwegian process. And so to do that, we also know, coming back to the fact that some say we need data on this level of asset, and then you get into some problems. But we managed to solve them, and I'll come back to that. Of course, the next question was, okay, we'll give you the data to your municipality. How do you use the data? Do you have the tools, do you have the expertise and resources to actually implement this data into your models? Some of the smaller municipalities didn't have a model. So each municipality have a different informatics systems. So so that's what they still doing in Norway. They're trying to test how can these data be most efficient and how can we implement it into our own systems. And so that's more of the no one size fits all. I mean, and so that makes it a bit complicated, but then that's how we at least found this in Soteria, by asking that there's differences in culture, differences in maturity, differences, when you get down to the municipality level. But in my opinion, you need to go down to the municipality level, because they are sort of implementing the climate adaptation measures.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
So as you mentioned, the knowledge bank case in Norway was the best practice that we leaned on when we were looking at organizing our think about how climate-related the risk and loss data should be managed in first place. So can you quickly take us through the main steps that were taken in order to remove these barriers, regulatory barriers, in this case? And we have about 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, I went through the legal part of it, and in one of our deliverables 1.3, I translated how the Ministry of Interior and the legal part to get around GDPR, to get around the insurance regulation of not sharing the data. So we spent time with them, and they went through the whole, how do we change the GDPR? What kind of rule do we, or provision or EU regulation do we need? So I translated that whole process. You will find that in this deliverable 1.3, because these are EU regulations which are similar. So what is this Norwegian case all about? It's about finding the right tool on the right level, down to the municipality level, to do this risk assessment and to understand which area, like you see here, this is the the city of Fredrikstad, which is in the south, they have huge problem, but they didn't know where to start or how to prioritize, and actually what to do. And another thing, they don't know really what to adapt to. Is it going to rain 20% more, 50% more? So they had to use these lost data, which is the historical data, and then they had to add on what is going to happen with like the climate change scenarios onto their risk assessment. So then, and this is another one we worked with 10 municipalities for 3 years to say, okay, Mia, I already promised us we want the data. I managed to get the data out of all the insurance company on these 10 municipalities down to asset level. It was given to them and they implemented them and did the testing. Were they useful? How could they use it? So they made these maps. This is a big city called Asker. And these spots you see is the postcode. So down to the postcode, they could see which area was mostly affected. And as I said, that they told us that they use this insurance loss data to assign site-specific rules and regulations for people who's building or going to do something to stormwater management in planning new areas. So that was more the land use part. So, and then how did it all start? Well, it started by because I got a very open mandate from my board. So we said, okay, let's invite the most important people we think are having a role in disaster risk management and in environment and climate and the Meteorological Institute, the Federation of the Municipalities, etc. So we sat around the table for quite a period, and then we used Sintef, Louis, and these experts to help us to document these. So, and we also worked to, like you see, we had connection with DG ECO, DG Klima, and UNDDR and OECD was also sort of involved along the line. And then out of this, like you see, quite long dialogue, we saw that this dialogue, it gives us that there was a need of an integrated knowledge on climate adaptation and how that worked together with the disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction, and that you had to have a more holistic approach for also decisions making, both in EU, national, and on the local level. And also we were looking at how we put these data from the insurance and other institutions or public authorities into one risk data hub and then what they saw, the national authorities saw that this is a way to better monitor and report also on the different UN agreements. I mean, the Paris and Sendai came in 2015, so we worked also before that. Okay, I'm not going to go through this. We have this, I mentioned this project where we call the pilot project, where we shared all this data, 10 years of insurance data with 10 municipalities. And after we had that, we had a lot of questions. And this is the questions, okay, we know the cause, we have the damage, we store the data, but which government's going to be responsible? And do the local authorities have adequate routines and system to store and use the data, etc. So all of these, and these are part of the questions that we will ask you in the table, so that you get some feedback on that. So this is then after all these discussions and political anchoring. I mean, I anchored this into my insurance board every meeting. I mean, it took so much effort to make them finally and convincing to say, Mia, we're going to share this data. We had agreement with the national civil protection for years to find out how do we make a system for this. So we ended up with this data bank that was from the Norwegian Directorate of Civil Protection. And so these are the, how they see the use of these data for them. And also we had, of course, the Directorate of Flooding and Landslide, and they also communicated and was part of this. So this is the new regulation that it came in 2021, and this is what I mentioned. These are the three stakeholders that can get asset level insurance data, and the rest will see the data on the municipal level on a map. So the question is, okay, this is a process. Here you have the Norwegian timeline of the process and everything that happened. And the question is, are this Norwegian process replicable in other European countries? And well, I think so. I mean, the regulations is, I won't say not a problem, but it's also, of course, we needed to take care of the competitive factor, the business sensitivity of these data. And this is what we did through the new regulation, and it's by path coding, etc. to get, they're not serious unless it's with these three that I mentioned as stakeholders. So I think I'll stop there. And then I leave it to our friend from Bismarck. So Milena's gonna talk about more, because we talked about this for a long time. She listened to me about what happened and all the frustration and how much convincing, etc. So then she said, oh, this is the intangible part of it, to actually convince people. And how do you get that into a project or that into the process? So that's on your field.
Thank you. So what I'll try now to build on with is the intangible set of barriers that we identified as important to consider. As Mia shared, we use the Norwegian knowledge bank as a basis to start and organize our thinking. And one of the things that this was absolutely new information for me. So as we were engaging in dialogues and discovering what had happened there, one of the things that occurred to me as someone with a behavioral eye is that along with the tangible and objective factors, there was a lot of input from intangible barriers that had something to do, that blocked also some of the processes that we wanted to see. So this is why we decided in our work in Soteria to find a way to analyze and understand the exact mix between tangible and intangible barriers, which are at play when we're talking about data sharing and also other processes related to climate adaptation. So just to give you the background of the basic thinking that we use when we employ a behavioral perspective, we usually start with identifying what is the desired behavior that we want to see a stakeholder or stakeholder group display. Then we look at what is preventing that currently. What are the factors that currently block this behavior? And related to that, of course, what are the drivers that actually can steer a change in the desired direction? And then we typically try to pilot test and explore in a small area within the same context where we're looking to make a change with the same actors in order to make sure that what we have identified and formulated as a solution actually works. So in the case of data sharing, this would mean that our ideal behavior is to have different stakeholders group contribute to and activate a common process of data sharing. That involves understanding why they wouldn't do so and so on. But the same thing could be applied to other behaviors in this context, such as buying insurance. So I'll give you in a moment examples around these. So one of the interesting contributions of the work that we did is actually to find a way to combine to create an analytical tool that really does this more comprehensive mapping and understanding of barriers by combining a tool that allows us to map tangible barriers, the classical style analysis, which covers political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, environmental, legal, barriers that exist in the environment. But then we added to that one of the behavioral models that allows us to map the factors which need to be present in a specific context in order to enable desired behavior change. So this is the combi model that basically looks at three groups of factors. One, capability. Can we be certain that the stakeholders involved have the capability and the capacity, the skill set to actually engage in the desired behavior? Is there a context that provides the opportunity for them to do so? Environmental, social, and so on. And then are they motivated? Do they have the right motivation in order to actually engage in this behavior? So one of the deliverables within the project actually was a document that combined these two based on the learnings from the Knowledge Bank case. And then we employed this combined analysis to 3 case studies in order to be sure that it really yields valuable information that allows us to differentiate the context from a behavioral change perspective and really allows us to understand what are the specific combinations of barriers, both tangible and intangible, that are present in these different contexts. So it was quite interesting. And then to go back to the main topic of what are the key intangible barriers that combine usually with the some of the tangible barriers that Nia touched on. This is again based on the analysis that the application of this combined analysis on 3 of the case studies in the project. First, lack of trust between public and private actors. This is something that is permanently present and will come up frequently in some of our findings. So fear of data misuse, reputational harm, and so on. There's perception for ownership, something that also Mia touched on. The fact that some stakeholders in the ecosystem perceive data as something they own rather than something that they steward. There's low awareness on the benefits, both for the society, but also for the specific entity that hosts and holds data and information. And that's to some extent related to the fact that in the socioeconomic context, there's very weak incentives, both reputational, economic, and social, for organizations to actually be proactive contributors to a data sharing ecosystem. In many cases, and that's also something that came out across from Norway, including because Nia is here and is one of those examples. But there's a reliance on individual champions rather than on a group level norm adherence, which normalizes this culture of sharing and contributing. There's very often fear-driven overestimation of the risks that come with sharing, and also because we have private sector stakeholders, also the competitive risks that come with that. And as usual, when we talk about behavior change, there's always the good old inertia and the inclination of human beings to prefer to stay with the status quo rather than to adopt new models of behavior. So these are the main groups of intangible barriers that we saw play a role in different levels of strengths across the different contexts. Okay. So,
Yeah, I can even another question. Is that
yes, absolutely.
I had noted for you?
And can you please show behavioral science insight
How they are applied to allocation and insurance for the creation of innovative insurance solution? That would be a very good question.
It is a good question. You need to look all along our vision to think about how can we use everything that we are discovering through our work towards towards innovation. I keep wanting to go back. Um, so, well, in order for insurance to actually serve as an adaptation measure, we need to have a match between the buyer and the insurance provider. And so, in that sense, wearing the behavioral glasses and understanding the barriers that fuels both the gap, the insurance gap, but also the gap between real and perceived risk is really an opportunity to come up with innovative designs, both for insurance services, but also for policies that ultimately reduce risks for society as a whole. So again, we are applying the same level of thinking. And I'm going to share with you insights that we generated through two of the case studies where we employed behavioral analysis. The first one comes from Zadar, where our audience were local farmers, where we have a very high share of men who are not insured despite decreasing risks, especially with related to drop. And you can see that existing coverage, when it exists actually, is related to other risks rather than the one that's most relevant there. So based on previous research that we did, we knew that some of the main reasons for the risk were associated with the misperception about the scale and the size of the risk, limited awareness, misperception about cost benefit, and conformity bias, the fact that everybody else is without insurance, so that was normalized. So we did a series of experiments embedded in a digital survey tool where we tested different techniques in order to see whether they would move the needle in terms of intention for purchasing insurance as a solution. And I'll quickly run through some of the findings. The first is that we discovered that the messenger of information who provide information about objective data about the risk matters significantly. So we tested a media source on the Association of Insurance Companies and the Farmers Association. And the message from the Farmers Association was the only one that actually changed awareness and perceived risk. So there was a sizable increase in the statements that asked farmers to define the likelihood that a high-risk event will occur. The format also matters quite a bit. So visuals and case studies were something that made it more relevant for them, and they were more inclined to act after that. Framing investment insurance as an investment in prevention was something that also was quite effective and much more effective than, for example, risk sharing. And then using social proof from another country that they identified with. So we get them information about the rates of insurance for farmers in Slovenia, which is right next door and a very nearby country as a context, was more effective in having them think about insurance as a solution rather than when we refer to other countries in Europe or Europe as a whole. And something that is not going to surprise you, but there is a persistent trust gap that came out here, even when they were introduced to an innovative form of solution, parametric solution, which solves the problem with the time between the event and the payout. So what seems to happen is that psychologically, they ignore the fact that this problem is solved and they focus on other problems which relate to the precision of satellite data that is used and the relevance of the assistance that they get. And then very quickly, the example from Gabrovo, where we use the data on that Gabriel mentioned earlier from Mitigrade, and did a series of interviews with property owners, both public and private sector, in order to have them assess or respond to the likelihood to take measures. What we saw is that there's a very distinct gap between the perceived risk and real risk, and that even when risk itself is revealed, that alone is not sufficient for readiness to act. So there is a need of first providing very specific solutions, which is what Mitigate does, and there was a very strong evidence that providing very specific suggestions was very effective. But also when these solutions bring other benefits. So there was a much higher likelihood for property owners to undertake measures for risk reduction when these would not only protect or reduce the risk, but they would also bring aesthetic reasons for cooling, aesthetic benefits, cooling benefits, and so on. So I will stop here in order to provide the floor for Polina to share the perspective of the insurance sector. But I wanted to just reinforce the fact that our experimental use of a behavioral layer of understanding and also testing solutions does hold great promise in opening opportunities that might accelerate and also help innovate in some of the processes, many of which might not be that difficult to execute based on closing that perception risk gap.
Thank you, Milena. In a report to the World Economic Forum last week, insurers were described as uniquely positioned to help mitigate catastrophic climate outcomes, not just compensate for them. This shift is already widely discussed from the pure claim settlings to risk prevention, but how it is suggested this to happen? Through innovative, just with my... Excuse me, this is not my presentation. The next. Okay. And how it is supposed to happen? Through innovative product design, which stimulate the risk prevention. This is where actually that could happen to help clients and policyholders to adapt effectively. And this is actually what we have tried in the last few months with our partners in Soteria to test, to incorporate technological advancement from one side and soft measures like behavioral approach in product proposition for property insurance focused on the risk reduction. We've incorporated here not only risk-based pricing, which is already started implementing in many places, but also recommendations for the preventive measures and premium discounts as incentive for implementation of those measures. And what could be the impact on the insurer's side of the risk prevention measures? Risk protection has direct connection and relation to the frequency and severity of the flood events. That means a lower amount of claims and less claims. That goes also in the reduction of the annual average loss and in the risk profile in general. It also improved insurability because in some of the high-risk areas that could be the only solution. And why we decided to involve here the behavioral approach. In order to implement the risk reduction measures, we know that the pricing is not enough as incentive to do it. We know that the people do not tend to behave rationally. And also, as Milena mentioned, we have here one very big barrier, the risk perception and the risk awareness quite true, especially in Bulgaria. So that's why we were hoping to tackle this issue. And very important for us was also with this approach to help inform and encourage the decision to invest in the risk reduction measures. Very briefly, what we have done in the GovOK study, after receiving the flood maps from Mitigate 2, the colleagues from the government municipality identified the high-risk areas. We were focused on the high-risk areas, and they selected several business properties, and they assigned accordingly the meetings of the behavioral smart with them. This time made the premium adjustments. So we calculated the higher premiums for those properties, approximately with 13% increase on the total premium of the property. It has to be noted here that that percentage, that difference between the medium and the high risk area could be much higher in the different part of Europe, but depends on the flood risk events. According to some studies, it could be up to 14% difference. Another instruments could be higher deductible. So the next step from those properties that implemented the flood risk measures, they can go in the lower risk zones. And I have a little time, what I see, but I will be very short, and apply lower premium. Very important part in this approach is the information presented to the policyholders and to the potential clients. And I think this is the innovative part. It was already explained by Gazao, because this information, the main part of it is presented in the report produced by the Integrate tool. In my view, it is very well structured and comprehensive report. It contains, as she explained, this visual presentation of the places, the property, around the property where the water can flow and accumulate. It contains the list of the recommendations with also visualization and explanation what it means. And what should accompany this report as information, and what will be the impact on the insurance premium. We have calculated premium with and without the preventive measures that have been discussed with the clients, with the policyholders, selected business owners. And additional information that actually occurs during this interview is in case of the green solution, nature-based solution, what will be the additional impact on the sustainability strategy of the company? And actually that was something that the clients was not aware, and it was interested to learn what could be the additional benefits, because it could be protection, for example, from heat, biodiversity benefits, could be even social benefits, etc. So the feedback from these interactions was very interesting for us to understand, and please to understand that in general it was interest, as it was mentioned, from the risk assessment presented, and agreement with this risk assessment, interest for the proposed preventive measures, readiness to implement it. Most of them I learned. They already invested or plan to invest in those of similar measures. And partnership with the bank could be beneficial, because such investments in some cases could be considered green on favorable terms, and that's something that could be beneficial for them. So as conclusion, what is the important thing here to conclude with? I can say risk protection is not just essential, it's inevitable part to the journey to climate adaptation. And I think it's clear already that insurance has a role to play here. Risk protection makes insurance coverage accessible, affordable, and equitable. And also addressing the protection gap, it's not only our responsibility, it's a shared responsibility. It was mentioned this partnership with the local and national authorities is very crucial to ensure resilience not only on the asset level, but on the community level as well. That's from my side. Thank you.